The greenhouse looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Not slowly forgotten. Not worn down over time. Just left. Lena Hart stood on the uneven, rocky ground, staring at the structure in front of her, trying to reconcile what she'd just bought with what she was actually seeing. The glass panels were cracked in places, but not shattered. The metal frame was rusted, but still standing. Vines had crept along the edges, reclaiming corners, but never fully taking over. And behind it, the ocean. Wide. Endless. Cold. At least the view's good, she muttered. She adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped closer. At 25, with $2 left in her pocket and no place willing to take her in anymore, this had been the only thing that made sense. Or at least, the only thing that felt like a decision instead of a failure. The listing had been simple. Abandoned botanical greenhouse. Coastal property. Minimum bid, $2. No photos that showed much. No description of the condition. No mention of why no one else wanted it. At the auction, people had barely looked up when it came up. Coastal land, unstable foundation, someone whispered. Salt damage eats everything, another added. Not worth the repairs. Lena had still raised her hand. She didn't know anything about greenhouses. Didn't know anything about botany. But she knew what it felt like to have nowhere left to go. And somehow, this place felt like something she could hold on to. Now, standing in front of it, that confidence felt thinner. The door hummed slightly off alignment, but it opened when she pushed it. The hinges groaned. The sound echoed strangely inside. The air was warmer than outside. Not comfortable, just trapped. Lena stepped in slowly. Rows of old planting beds stretched across the interior. Some still held dry, brittle soil. Others were overgrown with weeds that had pushed their way through cracks in the foundation. Broken pots. Rusted tools. A long central walkway ran down the middle, leading toward the far end of the structure. This could be fixed, she said quietly. She wasn't convincing herself yet, but she was trying. She walked further in, boots crunching lightly over scattered debris. Her eyes moved carefully, taking in details. What was salvageable? What was it? The glass ceiling above let in uneven light. Some panels were clear. Others were clouded or cracked, creating a patchwork of brightness and shadow across the floor. This isn't as bad as they said, she murmured. And then, she noticed something that didn't fit. Near the back of the greenhouse, where the structure connected to a small stone side building, the floor changed. The rest of the greenhouse had standard planting beds, raised, structured, consistent. But this section was flat, concrete, clean, too clean. Lena slowed her steps. That's new, she said quietly. Everything else showed age, decay, time. But this section looked maintained, or at least preserved. She approached carefully, her eyes scanning the edges. There, a seam, a faint rectangular outline embedded into the concrete floor. Her pulse quickened slightly. That's not original, she whispered. She crouched down, brushing her hand across the surface. Smooth, solid, but not permanent. Her fingers traced along the edge until they found it. A small recessed metal ring. Hidden, subtle. Lena stared at it for a long moment. This is a door. The realization came quickly, and with it, a question. Why would a greenhouse need a reinforced door in the floor? She stood slowly, glancing around the space again. No signs. No instructions. No indication anyone had been here recently. Just the structure. And this one piece that didn't belong. Lena exhaled slowly. Okay. She grabbed the ring. Pulled. At first, nothing happened. The seal held tight, resisting the movement. She adjusted her grip and pulled harder. A dull, heavy shift echoed beneath her feet. The hatch lifted, slowly, revealing darkness below. A narrow set of metal steps descended into the ground. Lena froze. The air that rose from below was cooler. Dry, still, not damp, not moldy, maintained. Her heart started to beat faster. This was used, she said quietly. Not abandoned like the rest. Not forgotten. Intentionally preserved. She stood there, staring into the opening. Every instinct told her to close it, to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But she didn't move. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. Metal walls. Clean. Uncorroded. And at the bottom, a door. Not old. Not worn. Modern. Lena swallowed. That's not right. Nothing about this place suggested anything modern. And yet, That door didn't belong to the same timeline as the greenhouse above it. She hesitated only a second longer. Then, she stepped down. Each step echoed softly beneath her. The air stayed cool. Still, controlled. By the time she reached the bottom, her grip on the phone had tightened slightly. She stood in front of the door. It was reinforced steel. Simple design. No rust. No damage. And, unlocked. Lena stared at it. Who leaves something like this unlocked? Her hand hovered near the handle. Then, she pushed it open. The hinges moved silently. Inside, lights flickered on. Automatically, Lena flinched, stepping back instinctively. Okay, the room beyond was nothing like the greenhouse above. Clean, organized, functional. Shelving units lined the walls. Work tables stood in the center. Metal cabinets filled with labeled containers. Everything looked ready, not abandoned. Paused. Lena stepped inside slowly. This isn't old, she said under her breath. She walked toward one of the shelves. Each container was labeled carefully. Plant samples, soil compositions, chemical treatments. Her brow furrowed. This wasn't just a greenhouse. This was a research facility. Hidden beneath it, she moved to the central table. A stack of documents lay neatly arranged. Lena picked one up. Typed, structured, detailed. She skimmed the first page, then stopped. Her expression changed. This. She flipped to the next page. Then the next. Each document described controlled plant growth experiments, yield improvements, resilience testing, but not in a general way. Specific crops, specific conditions, and then numbers, large numbers, production outputs far beyond normal agricultural expectations. Lena's grip tightened slightly. This isn't research for hobby farming, she said quietly. She flipped further. Financial projections, distribution models, then contracts, and signed draft agreements between the researcher and her eyes narrowed. Major food supply companies. Lena lowered the papers slowly. This place was supposed to scale, she said. Not small, not local, large, very large. She looked around the room again, this time seeing it differently. The organization, the preparation, the infrastructure, everything was set up for something big. And then, stopped. Abruptly. No signs of shutdown. No signs of damage. Just left. Lena stepped back slightly, her mind racing. This wasn't an abandoned greenhouse. It was a stalled operation. A project that had never been completed. And now, she owned it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What did you just walk into? She didn't have the full answer yet. But one thing was already clear. This place wasn't worthless. Not even close. Lena stood in the center of the underground room, the paper still in her hand, her mind trying to keep pace with what she was seeing. Everything about the space contradicted the greenhouse above. Up there, decay, neglect, abandonment. Down here, precision, planning, continuity. She set the documents back on the table carefully, forcing herself to slow down. Panic wouldn't help. Assumptions wouldn't help. Start from the beginning, she said quietly. She moved methodically now, treating the room like it was meant to be understood step by step. The shelves first. Each container was labeled with dates and codes. She pulled one down and examined it more closely. Seed samples, but not ordinary ones. Each label included notes, soil conditions, temperature tolerances, growth cycles. She grabbed another. Same pattern, different plant. Lena frowned. This isn't just storage, she murmured. It's tracking performance. She turned toward the cabinets and opened one. Inside were sealed binders. Dozens of them, organized chronologically. She pulled the most recent one and flipped it open. The first page was dated nearly 4 years ago. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That's not that long, she said. She flipped through the pages. Daily logs, growth measurements, yield comparisons, adjustments. It read like a full-scale agricultural research operation. Not theoretical, practical, tested, refined. Then she noticed something else. Every experiment followed a pattern. They weren't just trying to grow plants. They were trying to optimize them. Higher yield, lower water usage, faster growth cycles, efficient, repeatable, scalable. Lena's breathing slowed as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about plants, she said. It was about production. She flipped deeper into the binder, toward the final entries. The notes became more confident, less experimental, more definitive. Then, the last page. A summary. Final yield target achieved. System stable. Ready for expansion, pending partnership approval. Lena stared at the line. Expansion. She looked back at the contracts she had seen earlier. The names on them weren't small companies. They were major distributors. Large-scale suppliers. Whoever built this had solved something. Not perfectly, but enough to interest serious investment. And then, they disappeared. Lena closed the binder slowly. Why stop here? She asked under her breath. She walked back to the central table and gathered the contracts again. This time, she read them more carefully. Terms of partnership, distribution rights, licensing agreements, all unsigned. But one detail stood out. Every contract included a clause requiring proof of scalability before final approval. Lena exhaled slowly. They never proved it, she said. The research worked in controlled conditions, but they hadn't demonstrated it at scale, which meant the deals never finalized. The funding never came. And without funding, the operation stopped. Not because it failed, because it couldn't grow. Lena set the papers down again, her thoughts sharpening. This isn't dead, she said quietly. It's incomplete. She turned and looked toward the shelves again. Then toward the ceiling, toward the greenhouse above. Everything she needed was already here. The research, the system, the groundwork. What was missing was execution. She let out a slow breath, the weight of the realization settling in. At 25, with nothing but $2 and a collapsing life behind her, she had just stepped into something most people would never even see. Not luck, not a miracle, an opportunity. Real, practical, if she handled it right. The next few days were not dramatic. There was no sudden breakthrough, no instant transformation, just work. Lena started with the greenhouse itself. She cleared debris first. Broken pots, dead plants, rusted tools, anything that blocked movement or light. Then she assessed the structure. The frame was still solid. The glass, partially salvageable. Some panels needed replacing. Others just needed cleaning. She made a list. Then she started small, cleaning sections, repairing what she could with what she had. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to function. Once a small section of the greenhouse was usable, she moved to the next step. Testing the system, she returned to the underground room and selected a single crop profile from the binders, one of the more stable ones. She followed the notes exactly. Soil composition, watering schedule, light exposure. No shortcuts, no guesses. Just execution. The first results took time. Days passed, then weeks. Lena tracked everything, wrote down every change, every growth pattern, and slowly, the results matched the records. Higher yield, faster growth, less resource use. It wasn't theory. It worked. Lena stood in the greenhouse one morning, looking at the plants she had grown herself, her hands resting lightly on the edge of one of the beds. This is real, she said quietly. Not potential, not possibility, reality. From there, she scaled carefully. Not all at once, not recklessly. She expanded one section at a time, repaired more glass, stabilized more beds. Every step tested before moving forward. Every result documented. By the end of the second month, nearly half the greenhouse was operational. And the numbers spoke for themselves. Higher output than standard farming methods. Lower cost, greater consistency. Lena didn't rush into selling. She did something smarter. She documented everything. Photographs, data logs, growth comparisons. Then, she reached out. Not to everyone. To one company. One of the names from the original contracts. She sent them a concise report. No exaggeration. No claims beyond what she could prove. Just results. Then she waited. The response didn't come immediately. But when it did, it was direct. They wanted to see it in person. A week later, Lena stood at the edge of the greenhouse as two representatives walked through the structure, examining everything closely. They asked questions, detailed ones. She answered them honestly. No hype, no sales pitch, just facts. By the time they finished, the tone had shifted. Not skeptical anymore. Interested. Very interested. The agreement that followed wasn't rushed. It was structured. A licensing deal. They would fund expansion, provide resources, handle distribution. Lena would retain control of the process and receive a percentage of every implementation. Not a one-time payout. Sustainable income. Long-term. 3 months later, the greenhouse was fully restored. The water system repaired. The structure reinforced. The underground facility remained exactly as it was. Operational. Essential.